Morning, everybody. I'm Frank Yang, and I'm a partner with ADL Ventures. I'm joined here by my colleagues Matthew Paul and Austin Feely. We're really honored to host all of you for one of our learning modules today on the American-Made Solar Prize Round 7. Today, we're going to talk about business model and value proposition design for commercial success. Just want to walk through our agenda briefly. Again, welcome all of you, and thanks for joining. We're going to start out with some information about round 7 of the Solar Prize and how your organization is going to apply and leverage the prize. And the focus of this learning module is really going to be on identifying the right business models, outlining some successful industry examples, and then talking about how we put theory into practice and do this in the framework of a company, because certainly a lot of you today are either starting innovations from scratch or working at small businesses. Our hope is that we not only help you build these innovations through the prize, but build these into lasting enterprises that have a major impact on the industry. So before we go further, I just wanted to once again thank our project sponsors. So again, the National Renewable Energy Lab is a part of the U.S. Department of Energy. NREL has been a longtime innovator and leader in the solar sector. And the American-Made Challenges are really a unique effort that's come up in recent years by NREL to really provide rapid, non-dilutive funding for innovations that are developed and made here in the U.S. This is the 4th round of the Solar Prize that ADL is assisting with as a power connector. And as we'll talk about later, this is an exciting time to be in the industry in the US, and there really is unprecedented opportunity in the clean energy funding landscape. I'm going to hand it off now to my colleague Austin. He's going to talk a little bit about the administrative structure of the prize and some of the financial awards that are available. And we'll shift after that to talking a little bit about the different phases and how those fit in with the scope of developing your business.
Thanks, Frank. Yep, just to go over a few prize reminders. We are currently in the ready phase of the prize, and there'll be 20 semifinalists that come out of the ready phase with an option to win the Jedi component or to win the Power Up contest. And the Power Up contest is for applicants that don't move on to the set phase. There's still a chance to win some prize money as well as receive continued support from power connectors like ADL. The application deadline is coming up on September 27th. You can keep updated on HeroX page with any prize updates, changing of deadlines, webinars and learning modules like these. They'll be posted there. Official prize rules information will always be on there as well. And there's resources like other power connectors, and the connector database should be posted on the HeroX page. And then Frank will talk a little bit more about it as well, but ADL will be attending the RE Plus event from September 11th to September 14th. And we would love to see any and all applicants there and speak and network with you all. So I'll hand it back to Frank now.
Great. So I want to talk not only more about the prize, but how the prize fits within the framework of building business, which I think will then shed some light and some value on the business model design topic that we're going to speak about today. So the main focus of the American-Made Solar Prize is to really not only develop, but to also develop and demonstrate a concept and prove that concept for commercial viability. I think when you think about how hard it is to get a business going in an industry like solar, there are a couple of things that are critical barriers, which we'll talk about later. Of course, one is financing, and a lot of forms of financing, whether they're venture funding or grant funding, take quite a bit of time to raise. The Solar Prize is, relatively speaking, meant to be fairly rapid in nature, and then to provide smaller amounts, which then allow NREL to get a field of applicants in and to give larger amounts to the most promising innovations. And so if you think about the ready submission requirements, I would consider it, compared to traditional non-dilutive funding, to be a fairly light lift. You see on the right some of the requirements, and we really think about this in 3 phases. Number 1, identifying a need in the industry. Number 2, developing a pathway that's truly going to be disruptive and innovative. And number 3, which I think is very important, because this is a part that only you can execute on your own, and it's not something that the power connectors can really assist with. Is how do you make a detailed tactical plan to prove that concept from both a commercial and a technical standpoint. You guys are the experts at what you do, and you're among the best in the world at the products and services that you're trying to commercialize. So it's critical that you think through in detail, how you do this and how you differentiate yourself. And once again, I want to remind you that ADL and other organizations are here as power connectors. We also have a connector network which supplements that has a lot of commercial and technical assistance available as well. Also want to add that there's 2 supplemental opportunities in the ready phase, and one is the JEDI contest, and the other is the Power Up contest. You can see the details on the slide here, but a couple of things I would add about these supplementary opportunities is that although they may be optional for this prize, I would really see these frameworks as being like JEDI as being somewhat required for your business in today's solar market. I think if you think about how customers and project financiers and development partners look at products and services in today's industry, the JEDI principles that are laid out in this contest, I think are very critical to your business model and to your value proposition, and it's not something that you can think through. So I think many of you will have a JEDI angle that's worth applying for. Some of you won't. Even if you don't, we encourage you to really think through this in the framework of having a business that's going to make a greater impact on society. So lastly, as I mentioned, here are some additional resources. We have website links to the American Made Network, HeroX, which is the prize portal itself, Clean Energy Business Network, which is another collaborator of NREL, has a clean tech funding database. This gives you an idea of not only this prize, but where future funding opportunities may fit in for your organization. So we want to shift now to our learning module. We're really excited for this to be one of the first learning modules we're presenting in a recorded fashion as part of our work on the Solar Prize. And it really comes at an unprecedented time for the US solar market. So if you think about the impact of the IRA, particularly on domestic manufacturing and domestic supply chains, it really has the potential to provide an unprecedented impact on the future of the US solar market. So various research estimates have the market impact of the IRA boosting US solar capacity from 150 gigawatts today to 375 gigawatts by 2028. But it's really the nature of how the value chain is developed from an economic standpoint. Here in the US, it's going to transform. Obviously, as you guys know, there's a number of incentives in the Inflation Reduction Act for local manufacturing and local supply chains. And in all, there's about $60 billion of funding that's directed specifically towards US manufacturing. And that's triggered, over $100 billion of private investment announcements that have led to 50 new facilities and expansion announcements. And so this is compared to a U.S. landscape that really beyond solar module assembly didn't really have a lot of manufacturing. You think not only about cell and module manufacturing, but you think about the manufacturing of things like adhesives, backsheets, frames, junction boxes. It's really an entire solar value chain that's now being rebuilt here in the U.S. And I think given some of the fluctuations that happened with COVID and some of the longer-term concerns about dependency on foreign supply chains, we really feel confident that this manufacturing supply chain is here to stay. And that manufacturing supply chain will help the U.S. market grow at a faster pace, which will then have spillover effects for the entire ecosystem. So whether you're developing a product that's directly impacted by IRA funding, or you're developing a service that's maybe indirectly impacted by this market growth, really never seen a time in this industry where we've had just wholesale support across the entire solar spectrum for emerging technologies. And I think, as I noted, this really creates an unprecedented opportunity for innovators to jump in. So we're going to talk today about business model design and what is a business model, and why is a business model being properly designed, so important to an enterprise. So if you think about solar compared to something like a consumer software business, there's two aspects from my industry experience that really stand out. So certainly as somebody who was in the manufacturing part of the industry predominantly, it's a very capital intensive industry, and there's very long products life cycles for product acceptance. As those of you that have worked with NREL know, NREL does testing of modules for long-term reliability. Often customers need to see 2 or 3 years of data before they'll buy your module, as an example. And in that time, it may take you tens or hundreds of millions of dollars to get your product to market. And I think even if you're more on the software or services side of the industry, customer acquisition is and service traction is not nearly as fast as it is in consumer and other software-based industries. So when we think about a business model, we think about a couple things. So first of all, what is your offering and what is your channel to market? Are you actually making a product as a primary OEM? Are you a subcomponent supplier to a larger manufacturer? Are you perhaps licensing a technology or outsourcing that technology for contract manufacturing and not touching the production at all? And certainly in the software side, and the service side, it's a little bit less difficult of a decision because it's easier to pivot and it's easier to ramp up, and there's less capital and time involved in getting off the ground. Nonetheless, I think there's still some critical barriers to overcome. So I think if you think about product-based companies, the barriers are fairly straightforward. You need to have physical assets to manufacture your technology. You need to have raw materials. You need to have facilities, and you need to have shipping and logistics infrastructure to actually get this into the hands of customers. I think with service-based companies, particularly in software, it really comes down almost entirely to customer acquisition. So what is your customer acquisition cost? What is the lifetime value of that customer once it's acquired? And I think the ROI of how you acquire your customer and how you scale that customer base and how long those customers are recurring customers of yours, that's obviously going to make or break your business. And again, we don't have in solar the massive network effects that we do in consumer businesses. So if you're a software entrepreneur in solar, I think you have to think through your growth ramp, and you have to think through your customer acceptance in a very different way. From past experience doing this, I can tell you that raising the most money isn't necessarily the only metric that's important for success. As you'll see later on in our webinar, there are companies that follow very different and much leaner business models that are actually successful using those unique approaches. So once you as a team have decided what you want to pursue, then you've got to put theory into practice and put actual proposals on the table. So I think the Solar Prize is a great mechanism to not only get some funding in the door, but think about how you're going to propose things and how you're going to pitch things in the future to investors and other partners. And then lastly, where the rubber really hits the road is prototype. So whether you're a hardware entrepreneur or a software entrepreneur, there's some minimal level of demonstration that's needed to find customers and investors that are going to believe in what you do. And so as an example, in the panel manufacturing world, we would often be asked to provide 1 square foot or 2 square foot prototypes of our product to customers and strategic partners before there would be some level of commitment through a contingent purchase order or some other type of supply agreement. So that's a snapshot of the general evolution of how you might design your business model. What are some of the specific tactics that you might actually need to utilize to make sure this is done effectively? I think the number one thing that a lot of entrepreneurs disregard is the competition. I think coming in, a lot of you may feel what you're doing is truly unique, and maybe you may think that there's no direct competition for what you're doing. But the reality is, in an industry like solar, where at the end of the day, your value chain is in the business of selling energy, which is a commodity, your competition is always the incumbent solution on the market, as well as other products and services that your customer may spend money on instead of investing in your solution. So everybody has competition, and understanding both the direct and indirect competition really well is critical. And then once you understand that competition, developing a narrative is important. So you're going to see in one of the later examples, like how simple it is to actually articulate a product roadmap to the investment community. It doesn't have to be overly complex. And in fact, being overly complex, could be to your detriment. But we often talk about how in journalism, as an example, journalism teachers tell you that everything has to be written at a sixth to eighth grade level. I think of pitching investors and customers in a very simple way, very similar way. They see hundreds of pitches, a week or maybe even in a day, in some cases, if they're heavily involved in deal sourcing. And you really need to find a very clear and concise way to, stand out. And so what do you hope to achieve when you undertake this process of designing a business model? It's actually to achieve an unfair advantage over your competition. I think you would hear from any customer or strategic investor or strategic partner that what they want over their competition is an unfair advantage. It's something that gives them disproportionate benefit in fulfilling a need or realizing a return on their investment. And so we're going to talk in this webinar about some examples of how people have achieved that unfair advantage, and it really takes a lot of digging in and a lot of evaluation. You've got to look at so you may have heard the term SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. You really need to look at the internal and external landscape of where your business is situated, and figure out where are the pain points for customers, what are the key advantages you have, how do you translate those into the capitalizing on the right opportunities. And we're going to talk about iteration, and we're going to talk about scenario planning, really running lean and running a series of experiments that can be done quickly and cheaply is critical. So one of the experts on entrepreneurial finance, individual at Harvard Business School by the name of Bill Salmon, always talks about the venture business as being actually a series of small experiments. And so for every small experiment that you do that's successful enough to find a believer, what that gives you the opportunity to do is to run another series of small experiments. But then I think when you think about running big experiments that don't get you data and don't get you traction in the market, those become increasingly risky and harder to fund. And so those are a couple of considerations on like how to design your business model. And we'll look now at a couple of examples from industry on how this can be laid out and how this can be utilized from a planning perspective. So slide 13 here is a template called the Business Model Canvas. This comes from the National Science Foundation's I-Corps program. The I-Corps program is a program that a lot of entrepreneurs go through. I've been through it myself as a multiple-time founder who's received SBIR funding. And I can attest to the Business Model Canvas not only being useful, but the Business Model Canvas is something today that more and more investors are actually saying, hey, as a requirement of funding, I want you to do a business model canvas, and I want you to do market discovery. And in particular, for those of you that are in the cell and module business, I also recommend that you reach out to ADL's team that worked on the Perovskite Solar Prize and look at the webinar we've done there on market discovery, which complements this business model canvas. But here, primarily for the topic of business model design, you'll see that the business model canvas boils down a couple key elements of your business and asks you to lay them out in an organized manner, and think through what is your company gonna look like, and what are the key factors influencing the success and failure of your company. So I think in addition to the factors listed here, another way that I like to think about it is what I call the reverse exit timeline. So think about a success point for your company, whether it's achieving customers at scale and getting to profitability, whether it's being acquired or partnering with an established incumbent in your space. Estimate, and it's truly an estimate at this point in time. How many years is that going to take? And then think about all the necessary milestones, whether they're things like this prize funding, their government grants, the rounds of investments, that are needed to get there. So I think it's always useful to think about the business model canvas not only in a static manner, but to like work backwards from where you want to go from a success perspective. So once you have the business model nailed down, I think that it really does come down to customers buying your product. I think every company that's successful is ultimately going to be defined by what their customers think about it, think about them. And to me, the number one thing that's critical to think about here at the stage that you're at is what is your product or service roadmap, because I think certainly in applying for the prize, you're thinking through addressing a critical need in the industry and coming up with a demonstration that you can build. But I doubt that most of you are happy just stopping at the demonstration. You want not only a product and a service offering that's going to be successful, but you want to build that into a business. And I think having clarity and direction in that product roadmap is critical. So I use Tesla as a great example of a company that's articulated a very, very technical product in a very complex manufacturing industry in probably the most simple and user-friendly way that you possibly can. So as you may remember, in the early part of the 2010s, Tesla was primarily selling premium products, and the first generation product was actually a Roadster. After that, they rolled out the Model S and the Model X, which were more conventional sedans, but because of the stage of their adoption, still had significant manufacturing cost issues to be overcome. And I think part of what's made Tesla successful is that even in those times, they always had the focus on mass manufacturing, and they always had the focus on ultimately making their innovation affordable, which I think is a reality in any commodity market to be competitive. So if you think about the Model 3, which is increasingly popular today and has been brought to a price point that's highly competitive with conventional automobiles, that was part of their vision from the beginning. So when Elon Musk self-funded Tesla, he certainly didn't put in an initial amount of money that was going to be enough to build the first generation, the second generation, and the third generation. But because he had the vision of what each generation was going to become, Tesla was like I said, able to get enough funding to experiment with their first generation product. The founders of the company then put in more capital and also very effectively leveraged funding from DOE. It's one of DOE's biggest success stories in the loan program. And then once they were able to access capital from the public markets, they've really been able to commercialize a breakthrough product where there hasn't been a breakthrough in generations. And so this is a great example to think through, right? Because whether you're doing a solar cell, whether you're doing an inverter, whether you're doing some type of balance of system component, whether you're doing a software product, every product has a roadmap, and every product needs to have an evolution towards something that's more disruptive and more ambitious than what it is today. So I think that's not only important in articulating how you meet the needs for this prize, but also what your company vision is going forward, and then how you're going to raise follow-on capital after this. So on the flip side, you can have a product roadmap, but you can't actually execute that product roadmap with thinking about how to manage risk and financing in your product development. I think this is, at the end of the day, where every business model actually ends up being successful or failing, because as we like to say as founders, having cash for your business is like having blood in your body. Like if it's not flowing properly and you don't have it, unfortunately your business is not a living business. So there's a couple things to think through when we manage risk and we manage financing product development in the context of designing your business model. The number one thing, first and foremost, like I said, is risk versus return. So as a founder, you have to have some sense of how much risk you're willing to take, also how much dilution you're willing to take that level of risk, and like I said, what the ultimate return might be. And understanding these are educated guesses in startups, but usually if you're developing a roadmap to do anything, whether it's to take a trip or to develop a product, like if you don't know what the end point is, it's very unlikely that the intermediate points are actually going to be properly aligned in thinking. So how to balance risk and return is number one. Then what it's going to cost based on that business model, and how do you finance that R&D? Because certainly as a living business with customers, particularly a living business with customers and profitability, we don't need to have any of these discussions. We can actually just go borrow money from a bank. But I think if most of you could go borrow money from a bank, or you're being self-funded by profits, we wouldn't be having the discussion about the prize. So thinking about how you finance R&D is absolutely critical, because the earlier you are, of course, in the technology readiness level spectrum, the harder it is to raise funding. And one thing I would just add as a multiple time founder is that actually the size of the funding you're raising has very little relation in those early stages to the difficulty. I think there's maybe a misconception that, hey, raising a seed round is really easy because it's the smallest round of funding. I think if anything, raising a seed round is probably the hardest round for any company to raise. So thinking through how you finance that R&D, what the rounds of funding might be, how you might use things like grants and other non-dilutive funding to leverage and multiply that funding. Those are all critical from a business model design perspective. And then the last thing to think about is scenario planning, because we actually, when we start a company, we don't know much other than not everything's going to work out the way that we plan. And so when things are going to go wrong, the number one thing you have to do is thinking about how to mitigate the negative impacts and the risks, and how to pivot when things aren't quite going the way you plan. Because certainly if there's any rule with technology development, particularly in hardware, is that it always takes longer and always costs more, sometimes by a much larger factor than you would envision. And so scenario planning is an important way to think through how you get to a milestone, what happens if you don't get to that milestone, in some cases what happens if you exceed the milestone. All those frameworks have to be in place. So I like to use an example provided by Khosla Ventures, which was an investor in my prior company for a long time. It's called If-Then Planning. We've got a link here, and it's fairly simple. So certainly if any prize applicants are interested in learning more about this framework in the context of power connector support, we're happy to discuss this in our office hours. But again, it comes down to this notion that venture is about experimentation, and if you run an experiment and if it works out, or if you run an experiment and if it doesn't work out, then that dictates a very different set of decisions for your next round of funding or for your next round of product development. So really encourage you guys to look through that and think about that, not only in the context of the prize application, but in terms of how you build out your product and service offering. Because maybe for the ready phase, the prototype is an endpoint, but for your business and for your technology developments that you're undertaking, the prototyping is actually just the beginning. So I want to end by talking about some successful industry examples and how companies in the industry have been able to actually be creative in their business model design and their value proposition to be highly successful. Plus, obviously, First Solar is the largest panel manufacturer in the U.S. They're a $20 billion company today. But I think contrary to popular belief, First Solar didn't succeed solely as a panel manufacturer and a technology developer. I think that's a route that was made infeasible long ago by the massive investment by Chinese manufacturers. In fact, what First Solar did was they were very smart in pursuing vertical integration early on. They did this in a very targeted segment, utility scale project development, where their product is actually very well suited because of temperature coefficients, as well as the size and some of the installation properties. And they use this to build up a very strong base of franchise customers and investors. And so First Solar has been very successful in not only selling panels to a small and loyal following of utility scale developers, they are one of the best companies in the world at developing turnkey utility scale projects. So they're able to raise capital at a low cost early on, get into that market, and create a barrier to entry that, quite frankly, other panel manufacturers with project development businesses haven't been able to penetrate in the utility scale market. Many of you, through either your work on the prize or through just being homeowners, are probably familiar with Sunrun. They're a $3 billion company that's one of the leaders in the residential solar space. And you think back, 10 or 15 years ago, I think one of the most colorful phases of the industry was really the, residential solar wars between Sunrun, SolarCity, Sungevity, and others. And of course, in recent years, you've seen other players like Sunnova emerge as well with different models. I think what always made Sunrun unique was a very strong focus early on the dealer channel, and a very strong focus early on the financing mechanism. So unlike some other residential solar providers. Sunrun actually didn't heavily focus on acquiring physical assets. You know, they built out a network of dealer partners, and they built out a very strong financing offering, a power purchase agreement. And I think at the end of the day, you can argue all day about whether a PPA is better, whether a lease structure is better. There's certainly different benefits and drawbacks for all different consumers. But I think from the standpoint of the entrepreneur, the most important takeaway from Sunrun is creating an interface and creating a user experience that customers can latch onto. And certainly in a sector that has, as you know, very high customer acquisition, that interface is critical. So I think Sunrun did a great job at building the channel and owning the interface, and that's certainly a lesson for those of you that are maybe more in the services side of this. The last established company I want to talk about is SolarEdge. They're a $8 billion company that supplies microinverters. They also benefited significantly from the growth of the residential solar market, but not without some pretty difficult phases in its growth. So if you think about the micro inverter market, you guys probably know SolarEdge and Enphase, but there are many companies that tried this that were unsuccessful for a variety of reasons. And why was SolarEdge unique? I think there were two things early on in its success that were very key. First of all, again, the idea of working with incumbents in the industry and partnering, that's critical. They got some early design wins with silicon incumbents at the time, like BP Solar, that allowed them to validate and develop their product much more quickly than if they were doing that on a standalone basis. And then when they decided to go into manufacturing, they actually utilized contract manufacturing with the likes of Jabil and Flex. And that's been a big differentiator in SolarEdge's business model, because they're able to focus on the market channel and they're able to outsource the manufacturing. I think in that time period, a lot of companies focused on raising venture funding and building that channel themselves. Two other more emerging examples I want to highlight are Calux and Helioscope. We'll talk a little bit more about Calux in the next slide, as they're a cell and module manufacturer that I'm very familiar with. And but those are some companies that have had more recent success points. So going into Calux on more detail, so as a little bit of background, Calux is also funded by Khosla Ventures, and I was an advisor for Calux, before I actually joined, ADL. And you hear the term a lot in solar and also in the buildings and other deployment industries. You hear the term drop-in replacement, or in the manufacturing world, in the semiconductor industry, we call it a form, fit, function replacement as well. So what does that really mean? I think the simplest explanation of that notion is that Calux is developing a perovskite solar cell that's going into a tandem junction solar cell that's made where the bottom cell is made of silicon. But Calux is able to drop this cell into an existing silicon manufacturing process without any other modification to the manufacturing of the silicon module from a size or factory layout perspective. And that's absolutely critical, because part of this equation always comes down to cost and performance. I think achieving 30% efficiencies is certainly part of the value proposition of using perovskite solar. But I think without a supply chain to adopt it, and without players to invest in the manufacturing at scale, there isn't really a path forward. And so I think as a result of its own technical success, I think partially as a result of the IRA, Calux has now been able to start building out a pilot line in California. They've raised money from some blue chip investors. And so I think this is a great learning example for prize applicants to think through. Not only where is your product market fit, but what is your path of least resistance to getting into an existing supply chain. So I think this is one of many examples. I think the important thing for entrepreneurs is you can never copy what one company does successfully directly to your business, but there are not a lot of analogous learnings here that you can consider, both from the bigger public companies that we've talked about, as well as some of the smaller private companies. And I know at the end of the day, it seems very daunting. I've been in this position many times as a very early stage founder. You're just starting out, and you think that, hey, there's no way I can actually get to the point that these companies made it at. And what we want to tell you is, through our work with the prize, we've actually worked with a lot of successful examples that have actually started to make their way, there. And again, if you see, look at these 5 companies, they're not only some very innovative business models, but some very innovative products. So one in particular I want to highlight is AeroShield. Some of you may have seen that ADL hosted a panel at Greentown Labs a few weeks ago where AeroShield was featured. And AeroShield was actually a startup we initially supported through our work on the ABC project with DOE, as well as the Impel program, as an aerogel material company that was actually developing higher performance window insulation for buildings. And through the Solar Prize, and through this process that you see here, AeroShield was able to refine their pitch and find a value proposition for using that high performance technology to actually make solar energy collectors. And I think as a result, today investors view AeroShield not only as a small company that's developing a material, but as a company, again, that has an actual product roadmap, because they have a Windows product, they have solar and other products that are part of their next generation. And it all leverages the same technology, but without intelligent business model design and without intelligent customer discovery, AeroShield never would have gotten to this point. So in their case, they were a multiple round Solar Prize winner, and then recently have raised NSF SBIR phase 1, phase 2 grants, as well as a $4 million seed round. So I just want to say from experience that raising, again, a seed round is probably the hardest round, and raising a seed round at that scale for a player that's focused predominantly on commodities and buildings and energy sectors is probably one of the hardest things to do. So these folks have been in your shoes. So in addition to Power Connectors, feel free to ask us for introductions to them. But I think this is a path for success that lies in front of all of you as well. And so how do you articulate this value proposition in round 7 of the Solar Prize, in a way to get the funding to launch your business? So there's 3 key components, again, that I'll highlight here. Again, the 2,500 word narrative. So hopefully some of the stories we've told here today give you an idea of like how to frame that narrative. I think the 90-second video is really important because, as I said, if you don't have an elevator pitch and you don't have clarity and simplicity in your roadmap, you probably aren't going to go much beyond the prize if you're even successful in the prize. And lastly, JEDI, this is certainly a part that ADL, NREL, and DOE all feel very strongly about. I think there's one common complaint or question you get about the solar industry from investors, particularly the investors that have an impact lens, is what is the benefit of solar to lower and middle income communities and underserved communities, given the fact that solar projects typically have a long payback, and the financing structure of solar typically makes them more well suited to more well funded companies and individuals. Lastly, as I mentioned, for those of you that will be at RE Plus next week, we're going to be hosting a networking event for American-made innovators. It should be really exciting. This is going to be the largest edition of RE Plus, formerly SPI, in several years. There's been unprecedented interest not only in the show, but in these prizes. And so we are as excited as we are to be involved in these learning modules. We're 10 times more excited to see you guys in person, network, and learn more about how we can turn your stories into the next set of success stories in this industry. So thanks a lot for your time, and we'll look forward to talking more.